I mean, hearing David's story about his being kind of drawn to Poe, I mean, for me, that seemed like a story about finding a queer space. And I mean, I definitely feel like I had a similar attraction to the 19th century, though my queer space was mostly Melville. I was drawn to those novels where I thought I was seeing queer representation. But I feel like David's way in through Poe is the same thing. It's just a different kind of a perspective on the queer space that I think Poe ultimately gives us.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. This is Andrew Rimby. I am so excited to provide the next part of our Edgar Allan Poe discussion. So you all should have heard, or you need to listen. So pause this right now and go back to the conference recap that I had with my grad student and new faculty friends, giving the behind the scenes of what it's like to actually attend a literary conference, which I know to the general audience, you think we're all sitting around in a circle just reading books together, but there's a little more that happens at a literary conference. So I'm so excited today because I'm joined with two very special guests. I consider them queer American lit mentors, guides, kind of like my Dante's Inferno guides into all things queer studies. And I know that one of them is actually working on a book about devils and American literature. So I think hell and Halloween, we're in that space right now. So let me introduce them. I'm joined here with Paul Jones, who his recent book is called Poe, Queerness, and the End of Time, just published in the summer of 2022. So we're going to dive deep into that. And then I'm also joined with David Greven, who's writing a book right now called All the Devils Are Here, Literary Influence and American Romanticism. Can't wait to read that, David. We're going to get into other works by both of them too that I'm sure will come up that I looked into when I first went to Stony Brook and went to the library stacks. So welcome, you two. I'm so glad that we're not in the Salem 1692 period right now, because they would have seen these works and our heads would have been on the chopping block. So welcome, you two. This is so exciting.
Thanks, Andrew.
Oh, thank you.
Now I'm imagining all of us in the stocks.
Yeah, well, that's true. They didn't, yeah, it wasn't guillotine French Revolution style, but I don't know which is, both are bad. But so, you know, just laughing about some morbid death humor. So I was so excited to actually just meet you two, because I had known, David, your work when I first learned about 19th century queer American studies and literature, and I gravitated to your masculinity homoerotic work with Hawthorne, Melville, Poe. And then I just started to see this litany of books you've written. And it goes from like Hitchcock to, I know he's working on a Ryan Murphy cinema book right now. Yeah, I just want to know, David and Paul, maybe what is your first memory of Poe, or even just like anything in the 19th century with American literature? Like, what was that moment where something registered for you of, this is an interesting period?
Well, I guess, you know, I remember a very, I mean, one of my biggest refuges as a kid was the used bookstore that I used to haunt, like, you know, some kind of apparition or something. But you know, I remember there was this really pulpy, you know, copy of Poe's Tales with some ghoulish creature on the cover that looked like, you know, Mary Shelley's Creature. And you know, I remember just being really drawn into just the very consistent pervasive, sustained atmosphere of gloom. Somehow that brought me in, and kind of in a weird way nourished me. I felt like I belonged to this world somehow. You know, just the sustained, I mean, these are all very, we consider them very negative affects, right? Gloom, morbidity, dissipation, anxiety. But somehow, I guess, you know, especially being a kid in, you know, Reagan's America, I guess I felt that this was weirdly inviting and sort of, like I said, nourishing, as opposed to like the sort of the bright conformist atmosphere that was immediately outside of the bookstore, right? So yeah, that's my earliest memory of really connecting to Poe.
Yeah.
And I'll just say, yeah, I was trying to recall where my first memory of Poe, and I don't have a vivid memory like David has. I must have been introduced to Poe in junior high school or high school, probably Telltale Heart or Cask of Amontillado, and I don't even really have a memory in college of again, I'm sure he was on the reading list for American Lit surveys, but I don't have, he didn't make an impression. And so much so that I kind of absorbed the, I guess, the scholarly snobbery against him, because the kind of one clear memory I have is a friend of mine telling me Poe is his favorite author, and I just laughed at him and said, nobody takes him seriously. Of course, I was wrong about that, because people were were already taking him seriously, but as a new grad student, I thought I knew the kind of who you're supposed to take seriously and who not. So it really wasn't until my PhD program that I started thinking about him seriously. I was going to do a dissertation on antebellum Southern fiction, and both myself and my dissertation director were kind of worried about me going on the job market with chapters about all these obscure historical romancers and plantation novelists. So we really wanted to get some canonical authors in there, and Poe was definitely the one who was kind of really the kind of became the star of the dissertation, just because he really fit well, because he really, his works really highlight the fears and the anxieties that those Southerners in the mid-19th century had, kind of more loudly than anybody else could proclaim them.
Yeah, I think okay. So I'm really sensing, I love this through line. I mean, David, you mentioned Reagan's America, you've mentioned negative affects, right? And just for the public, affect, there is kind of a study of affect theory, and affect is emotion, just for all of you out there. But there's anxiety that, Paul, you're mentioning. And do you think that's because of when you encountered Poe, like in grad studies, because of the American cultural time, which might be different than like just me encountering Poe in middle school in the early 2000s? Like, do you think we might have different literary readings of Poe because of the historic culture of our period?
I mean, I think that's, yeah, definitely probably the case. I mean, hearing David's story about his being kind of drawn to Poe, I mean, for me, that seemed like a story about finding a queer space. And I mean, I definitely feel like I had a similar attraction to the 19th century, though my queer space was mostly Melville. I was drawn to those novels where I thought I was seeing queer representation. But I feel like David's way in through Poe is the same thing. It's just a different kind of a perspective on the queer space that I think Poe ultimately gives us, or that readers find in Poe. I think maybe the better way to emphasize that.
Right. But I mean, I didn't, you know, it's not like I had any kind of immediate sense that Poe was a queer author. It's only, I mean, actually, I think it was, I mean, I'd always loved reading Poe, and I did gradually upgrade to a Penguin edition of Poe's Selected Tales with the raven on the cover, that conferred this kind of, you know, authorial legitimacy on Poe. But you know, it wasn't until graduate school and I started to really get interested in, you know, depictions of masculinity, particularly a masculinity that seemed to be rejecting all the traditional, aspects of masculinity, in particular, heterosexual marriage and so on and so forth. But also, as I argued in my first book, they're not, the men in these fictions are not only rejecting heterosexuality, they're also rejecting male companionship.
Yeah. Wait, is this Men Beyond Desire? Just to plug that book. Okay.
Yes. Thank you, Andrew. Yes. So Leslie Fiedler's thesis, focuses so much on, male friendship as an escape from what he calls the gentle tyranny of home and woman. But it seemed to me that friendship was just as problematic in Poe's work as traditional romance. So and I think the story, and Paul will immediately I think share my interest in this. I mean, the story in the story of Poe is the fall of the House of Usher that to me really kind of brought all this stuff together, because it is as much a portrait of a failed male friendship as it is an expression of horror at traditional relationships.
Yeah, well, and that's the story that all three of us, like
Right.
at the conference, we were like, oh, okay, what are you applying? Like, how are you looking at this angle? And like, we've all kind of, and we'll get there, don't worry, audience, we'll all provide our own kind of reading. But something that really strikes me is like, so I know, Paul, you mentioned reading Poe in middle school. David, did you encounter Poe in middle school?
No. I mean, I found Poe entirely on my own. I was never taught Poe at any point. It wasn't until I got to college and I took an amazing course called Hawthorne, Poe, and Melville.
Wow.
It was the first time I actually took any of those authors really seriously, and also thinking about the three of them in unison. I'd always thought of Poe as kind of a private pleasure, something that kind of belonged to me. It wasn't on the curriculum. It wasn't legitimate. I mean, I went to Catholic school, so I don't know if that means anything, but Poe was certainly never assigned. I mean, we did To Kill a Mockingbird. I mean, we didn't do Poe.
Yeah. So,
it really wasn't until college that, and that also, clarifies that, as professors, we have an enormous opportunity to shape what people think is legitimate, right?
Well, and yeah, the reason I'm kind of harping on this middle school aspect is just because there was like a Poe fervor in my middle school. Like
Wow.
reading it almost every year, we would read a different Poe story, because it actually started to become part of the Jersey like curriculum of standardized testing. And like they used Poe a lot for comprehension. And but I look back and I realize, wow, one of my favorites. I mean, I love all the stories. I love The Fall of the House of Usher, but actually I think one of my absolute favorite stories is The Mask of the Red Death, because of how decadent it's. Very Oscar Wilde, Picture of Dorian Gray, like it's doesn't fit neatly in a genre, and I love those stories. And but I look at that and it's like you said, David, almost this private, intimate experience. And I'm thinking, this is an interesting story to teach middle schoolers. Or we even read The Fall of the House of Usher, and that this homosocial, the male friendships, but we can even try to push it to eroticism, which I know the three of us have all done in different ways. Paul most recently with his book on Poe and queerness. So of course I'm going to mention the female queer literary critic in the room who like really ushered in that homoerotic social reading of male friendship, Eve Sedgwick, with Between Men. And I'm curious because I'm going to reveal my age. I just turned 30, but, and I'll pretend Paul and David are, they're in the 30-year-old club in my memory, in my mind. But I'm assuming you both were either about to enter grad school or had just entered grad school, that Eve Sedgwick's work was still pretty new. Like she was probably alive. And, do you remember when that came out, Between Men or Epistemology of the Closet? Like, was it as groundbreaking as I've read it as, a queer critical text that you need to read in this genealogy.
Your brain needs support, and new Ollie Brainy Chews are a delightful way to take care of your cognitive health. Made with scientifically backed ingredients like Thai ginger, L-theanine, and caffeine, Brainy Chews support healthy brain function and help you find your focus, stay chill, or get energized. Be kind to your mind and get these nootropic chews at ollie.com. That's OLLY.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the Food and Drug Administration. This product is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.
The Ivory Tower Boiler Room is so happy to welcome Broadview Press as our official sponsor. Broadview Press is an independent academic publisher in the humanities that produces high-quality, pedagogically useful books for use in university and college classrooms. They publish in the humanities, mainly in English studies, writing, philosophy, and history. They always publish with an eye towards diversity, so there is a strong list of titles from women, people of color, and other authors from marginalized groups. In the summer of 2022, they launched their new Broadview anthology of American literature, which increases diversity in the classroom because it rethinks the American canon and breathes new life into the American Literary Survey. It's actually been called, quote, the new gold standard in the field. I love using Broadview Press text in my own classroom at Stony Brook University. I can't wait to use the new anthology of American literature when I have the opportunity. And for all of you out there, Broadview Press has given us the official code Ivory Tower for 20% off site-wide on broadviewpress.com. Again, that is code Ivory Tower for 20% off. And now, a message from the Gay and Lesbian Review.
Hello, listeners. This is Stephen Hemrick, the publisher of the GNLR, here with a special offer just for you. For those of you who aren't familiar with the GNLR, let me provide a little background. The GLR is a bi-monthly magazine of history, culture, and politics that publishes essays in a wide range of disciplines, as well as a slew of reviews of books, plays, and movies, and a number of special features such as artists' profiles and the popular art memo column. Each issue brings you consistently intelligent, lively, thought-provoking articles focused on a unifying theme and brings together the leading minds on the topic. You won't find a lot about the latest dating fads or fashion trends, though you might find articles about online dating as a social phenomenon or the gay influence on 20th century fashion. For example, the theme of the current issue is Queens and Kings, and it features an article by Andrew Holleran about Truman Capote's relationships with glamorous women, the women he called his swans. Now for the special offer. When you subscribe, you'll receive a free copy with any print or digital subscription. That's 7 issues instead of 6. Visit glreview.org. That's glreview.org. Click subscribe and enter promo code ITBR for your free issue. And as an added bonus, you'll receive online access to all archived issues of the magazine.
Well, I mean, I think so. I mean, I wouldn't say it was just Sedgwick. There was a whole moment of a lot of queer theory and queer criticism coming out in the mid to late 90s. But yes, I definitely have my signed copy of Epistemology of the Closet that I will treasure. Yeah, so it did mean something really important. And I think mostly it's just because it was the Academy sanctioning this, this approach to literature. I was at the University of Tennessee in those years, and 4 brave souls started a queer theory reading group. And of course, just the phrase put off so many people, but we did it. We read queer theory, and so Leo Bersani and Michael Warner, we were reading all of that stuff as it was coming out, and we didn't understand all of it, but we definitely were finding things that seemed relevant and important there.
Yeah, David Halperin.
Yeah.
Oh, that time, I don't know, like, is the rectum a grave by Leo Bersani? I mean, talk about a creative essay. Woo. but I know David's like ready. He's yeah,
well,
yeah.
well, I mean, so I was, I think I was still closeted at some point in my early 20s when I first got wind of this, I don't know, critical movement known as queer theory. And I remember reading an article in the New Republic that said, "Why not gay studies?" And I think that, and there was like a picture of a classical male bust on the cover, and I was like, this is intriguing. So I remember that was my first exposure to Eve Sedgwick, and that was still in the early 90s. But something about Sedgwick in particular is that she almost became something of a crossover celebrity.
Mm-hmm.
I think if people knew about this, they knew about her work. I have to say that I'm very, very grateful for the fact that when I was in college, I won a McNair Fellowship, which gave me an opportunity to work with a professor doing a kind of summer course, basically. And the one that the course that I proposed is I wanted to learn about queer theory. So here I am, at Hunter College, New York, in those days, and one summer I just spent for the first time reading Sedgwick and Judith Butler, also Jonathan Dollimore, who wrote Sexual Dissidence, which was very important.
I don't hear his name a lot. David I'm assuming sadly he is.
No.
Oh, he's alive. He's alive. Okay.
Yeah. He's on Facebook. I often.
Oh, good. Phew.
Yeah. No, he's on Facebook.
Okay, Jonathan. Shout out to Jonathan Dollimore. We'll have to have him on eventually. No, I love his work.
Well, that would be great. So, but just actually immersing myself in these works, and having a very I was assigned a professor named Stephen Kruger, who's a medievalist at Queens College, who's just a fantastic person to work with. And just being guided through these works with a very kind of, by a very kind interlocutor who's also very knowledgeable was just extremely helpful. So I really am grateful for that experience.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because when I went to Kane in North Jersey for my undergrad. Then I, went out to Stony Brook for my PhD. And like we're talking about 2012 to the current moment. And I had John Gruser as my Hawthorne Poe Melville professor. All of us in Poe studies know John Gruser, such a sweet man. And he was a great professor. And I feel like I was in a moment though, where if homoerotic elements weren't discussed, then it was an issue. Like in the classroom now, especially, I feel if you don't talk about same-sex desire, a student will probably call you out. Not call you out, but they're going to insert it themselves into the conversation. But it's very interesting when I, have these cross-generational conversations, because it was not always like that. Like you would never just be like, yeah, but we need more than Sedgwicks between men. Like we need to add in, what is it like when sex is actually on the page? Like that now we actually have novels where, men are in the bedroom together and it's in the open. Like the closet has its space, but we're, actually in the bedroom, on the bed. So, how do you both reflect maybe on that, like on just yourselves in the classroom, or, reflecting on when you were grad students and the current moment?
I mean, it's definitely a very different world. I remember my first semester of grad school, we had to do presentations in an American novel class. And I did a gay presentation. I did a reading of 3 Melville novels, Redburn, White Jacket, and Moby Dick, and said we're moving towards a depiction of gay marriage. And really nobody knew. The professor certainly did not know what to say about it. He was not prepared for that conversation or that topic to come up. And so it mostly was pretty awkward, but I'm pretty proud that the kid I was in that year did that. But yeah, you're right. Now, everybody, even in the earliest undergraduate class, students are very comfortable talking about those issues, and they will bring them up even if you don't. And yeah, I think you're right that the world has changed, and the conversations we're willing to have or see as necessary are so different than when we started school. And maybe David and I don't know exactly if we're the same age or not, but
Um, well, I mean, yeah, I think we have similar experiences, Paul. I mean, it's funny. I feel like there are certain contexts in which talking about queer issues is not only permissible but inevitable or encouraged. So, I mean, for instance, when I teach my Hitchcock class, wearing my film studies hat, I mean, just the most recent time I taught it was in the spring. I mean, I certainly couldn't even keep up with the kind of queer readings that were proliferating, amongst my students. But then, I taught an English 101 the same semester, and I did, a variety of works, but I did Streetcar Named Desire. And when we got to the whole passage that was expurgated from the 1950s film about Blanche Dubois' first husband, Alan, and when she discovers him in bed with another man, and that extraordinary monologue of Blanche's where she recalls what she said to Alan, I know I saw you disgust me, and then he runs out and he kills himself, he shoots himself. My students were very uncomfortable with all of that stuff. I was really surprised. I think they were respectfully silent as we discussed this. So even though we're in this fantastic moment of sort of a plethora of queer approaches, and also I think trans studies has really kind of reshaped a lot of this stuff. But I think I don't really take it for granted that we're in a kind of, endlessly open queer moment where I still think it's contested territory.
yeah.
No, and I think definitely, we need to, like you're saying, recognize that also depending on like where in the country you are, like you might face more backlash from students, or even especially, I mean, in K through 12, it's a whole other, set of circumstances, because academic speech is, I mean, you have academic speech, but you also have to be beholden to the curriculum. So, right, like doing a queer Poe reading, which we did in middle school. I mean, I don't know if I would say queer Poe, but we did like at least these like men are, chummy and having a bromance in The Fall of the House of Usher. But it was also, I was taught by a lot of master's or grad student high school teachers who like were writing their thesis on, like having read Sedgwick, or like at least they knew these conversations. And it was encouraged by New Jersey, or even, New York, I would say similar circumstances. But, if you're in Florida, it might be a very different conversation. Especially now with like the Don't Say Gay bill and all of these elements. So yes, David, I'm glad you brought that, the reality in too. But something I'm curious about is, and this is a difficult question, so, bear with me, but especially because you two, I can assume, have had at least 20 years, if not more, in the academy, even from your grad student time.
Has it been that long?
I'm aging them now, but they're still glowing academics and always glowing.
Yeah.
But do you feel like that there's been is it like a roping off, thinking of the phrase, like a sectioning off of, and we can get into the difference between gay and lesbian studies and queer studies, which I still kind of wonder, like, where is gay? Is there still a gay studies, or has it all just fallen into queer studies? But do you feel like those who are doing the work that you two are doing, and that, I'm a part of, that you're kind of in your own little community in your university, or do you feel that these readings have been integrated into every faculty member's vernacular? especially in the classroom?
Mm.
I mean, I think it's pretty widespread. So I would say, I mean, probably not every one of my colleagues, but certainly a lot of them, especially people coming from like with women and gender studies backgrounds and theoretical backgrounds. I feel like, I mean, they may not spend much of their time writing about queer topics or issues or approaches, but I'm certain in their classrooms that it shows up. So yeah, so I mean, I don't feel like I'm kind of cordoned off into some kind of subsection of literary studies or theoretical approaches. I don't know what, David, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think queer approaches have been so integrated into what most people are doing. I mean, in fact, I think it's probably there's more of an onus on us to sort of reclaim the radicalism of queer theory and queer approaches, because I think it has become fairly widespread. And you know, it's certainly a lot of the people who sort of write from a queer theory perspective are also not queer identifying either. So, you know, there's all that.
Well, Eve Sedgwick.
Yeah,
She's
yeah,
a big example of that.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Although she's such a she was such an ally that she kind of transcended the categories.
Oh
and
yes, yes, yeah.
you
No,
know.
there are good acting agents. I don't want to, make that. But
yeah. But I'm kind of sometimes astonished at the, you know, the appeal of it for people who are not queer identifying, but sort of have immersed themselves in it. I'm sure we can all think of examples of people, but you know, I also think I don't know, maybe I'm strange or just an outlier or something. I mean, I also don't feel like my own approach is particularly, I don't know, emblematic of what queer theory approaches to these questions have been. I mean, you know, as I've written before, I mean, I've been chafing against the Foucauldian sort of reading of sexuality in the 19th century for a long time, you know, and you know, I'm one of those rare queer academics for whom Foucault is not a hero or a guide or a mentor.
that's me too.
Oh wow, okay.
No, well, I find his no, I'm in your camp. I find his writing interesting, but I think that I see it more as just speculative writing and not really based in, he's trying to do historiography, but I don't see the history. I kind of see, well, he was in philosophy. He was trained as a philosopher. So I feel like he makes a lot of large claims, like, which we're supposed to do as academics, and it's groundbreaking, but his language is difficult. I think for jargon, he can be really difficult to teach about. He can be difficult to teach to, especially students, to undergrad students.
Interesting. Well, I mean, of course he's one of the great thinkers. I mean, it's not in no way, you know, to diss Foucault, but I mean, it's interesting to me as much as anything to track the widespread proliferation of his ideas, you know, and the way that some of his ideas became dogma. In particular, you know, he's a brilliant rhetorician who was also very involved in the English translations of his work. So his writing has this incredible rhetorical punch, right? But you know, that line from History of Sexuality, Volume 1, you know, the homosexual became a species, you know, in the 1860s. It has to be one of the most decisive sentences in you know, academic writing, and it's amazing to me how long that approach has persisted, that there was no homosexual presence, you know, before this you know, kind of rhetorical moment of the 1860s. So you know, there are a lot of debates, of course, within queer theory about how to approach questions of sexual history.
No, this isn't. Thank you, David, because you just made my job so much easier. This is such a good like jumping off point, because I think it will really get us into each of our approaches, and especially like where I kind of have seen the work that, you know, you and Paul and so many mentors, queer studies mentors I look up to, queer literary theorists I look up to, um, that the biography, like for Foucault, he was very interested in identity and this biography approach. Even we can say Cedric too, of like the playful game of Shakespeare's gay, Plato's gay, Melville's gay, Hawthorne's gay. I don't know. Everyone is gay, basically. And it's this just rhetorical game she wants to do to just bring it out of the closet, which I respect, understand, right? There's a time that had to be done for what we're talking about now. But I am kind of curious, like where, right, how sexual language is used, right? Like saying Poe is gay, this is anachronistic, right? It's out of time, right? We're getting into kind of Paul and the queerness of time. I know David, your work has looked into that too, about the antebellum period, so before the Civil War. And I kind of feel like now that's actually where queer studies, I don't want to say fracturing, but just and it's not even a debate. I think it's just kind of figuring out, like you said, David, like what's the radicalism in queer studies? And maybe it's, are we more interested in the biography of an author and their queerness, or are we more interested in the actual like work, The Mask of the Red Death, and the elements of queerness in the work, and kind of trying to like see if we can separate Poe as much as we can? So I know I offered a lot there, but yeah, what's going on? Well, can we actually separate the author from their work, from their short story, poetry, film, music, right? That's an age-old question. So when it comes to Poe, does he have to be queer? Does Whitman have to be queer in order for their work to be queer? Well, this is only the beginning of my discussion with David Greven and Paul Jones. So, yes, to listen to the rest of the episode where each of us discusses our own queer reading of Poe, you have to head to our Patreon, to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room Cafe. Head to patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room. That is patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room. Yeah, I spelled it out for you. And I had such a good time with both David and Paul. I love having these queer academic conversations. Also, I'm releasing a video of this conclusion. So go to our social media, to TikTok, Instagram at Ivory Tower Boiler Room, because I'm actually wearing some Ivory Tower Boiler Room merchandise. Yes, I am wearing an Ivory Tower Boiler Room t-shirt, the Ivory Tower Boiler Room hat, and I just made a really nice gingerbread tea, and it's in my Ivory Tower Boiler Room mug. So you all can get your own Ivory Tower Boiler Room merchandise. Do you want a hat? Do you want a shirt? Do you want our mug? Do you want our tote bag? The options are endless. So if you want any Ivory Tower Boiler Room merch, it's an amazing logo. Who doesn't want the Ivory Tower with flames coming out of it? Such an apt metaphor for a lot going on in our culture right now. Email us at ivorytowerboilerroom@gmail.com. Very easy to remember. And just ask, what kind of merch do you want? And I will respond right back to you with the prices and get your address and get your Venmo. And you're going to have Ivory Tower Boiler Room merchandise. It's that easy. Also, there's so much on Patreon, and you're going to hear more about that because I just recorded a new bookmark, a new winter bookmark with Mary DePippi, because we're almost in the winter. We're still in the fall, but here on Long Island, it feels like the winter. But, we're still in the fall, but it's a little teaser for you. So here is the new bookmark that I recorded with Mary. Bye, everyone. Hi, Ivory Tower Boiler Room audience. It is Andrew Rimby, the director of the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. Welcome to our winter season. And are you trying to stay warm this season? Well, guess what? we have the Ivory Tower Boiler Room Cafe. It is our Patreon where there is so much bonus content. So I'll go over all that. But first, it's only $5, which is less than a latte, a cappuccino, a coffee, a tea, basically anything now because, we have some inflation going on. So join us on our Patreon, patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room. What do you get? You get Gregory Maguire giving us all the scoop on the Wicked movie musical. You get Jesse Green giving us his hot takes on the Broadway musical. If you don't know who Jesse is, well, you should, because he's the chief theater critic of the New York Times. You get all the JFK and Marilyn Monroe scoop from Elizabeth Winder, a Marilyn Monroe biographer. So much more. You get all our video interviews. You can see everything, including the bonus content. And Mary's going to tell you from True Crime and Academia what you get later. But if you're not following us on social media and seeing our video teasers, well, you need that to stay, nice and energized on these winter days. So follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Ivory Tower Boiler Room. While it's still here, why don't you follow us on Twitter at Ivory Boiler Room? And here's my chief contributor, Mary.
Hey, True Crime friends and Ivory Tower Boiler Room friends. Like Andrew said, you're going to get access to all of this bonus content. That includes True Crime and Academia. So not only will you have access to the bonus episode each month, you will also have video access to the interviews that I conduct on my podcast once a month. You get all of that extra content at your fingertips whenever you feel like watching it, literally for a cup of coffee. So why don't you just buy us one? That'd be so nice. We would appreciate that because we love your support already, but we could use a little bit more if you don't mind.
Yes, we could. And also, hey, do you all know you can actually DM us questions at our social media channels? Yes. Also, why don't you ask us questions with our social media posts? We love it. We even shout out questions on our episodes. And if you want, you can always email us at ivorytowerboilerroom@gmail.com to actually order our merchandise. So we have hats, we have t-shirts, we have posters, we have everything. If you want any merchandise with the Ivory Tower Boiler Room logo, we're going to make it happen for you. Okay, on that note, happy winter season, everyone.
Happy winter.